Sometimes the deepest loneliness lives in those who spend their lives caring for others. Magda knew this truth better than most as she walked through her empty cottage, listening to the silence that had been her only companion for decades. At 57, she had delivered half the mountain village of Valcea into this world. Her hands were gentle and sure, but the mothers always looked past her afterward. Tonight, the blood moon hung heavy above the peaks, casting everything in red shadows. In the distance, wolves sang songs that stirred old memories in her bones. She had heard the village stories since childhood. Every generation, when the moon bled, the ancient vampire lord would wake from his slumber beneath the castle ruins. Lord Radu would choose someone for an old, dark purpose. But what could an immortal want with a forgotten woman like her? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Magda set down her worn leather satchel and surveyed the cottage that had been her sanctuary for 30 years. The hearthstone still held warmth from the morning fire, and bundles of dried lavender and chamomile hung from the wooden beams overhead, filling the air with the scent of healing. This was her world, small, orderly, purposeful. Every jar of tincture had its place on the shelves her father had built, every tool of her trade polished and ready. The blood moon's crimson light filtered through her small windows, painting everything in shades of memory. She moved to the kitchen table, where her grandmother's healing pouch lay open, its worn leather edges soft as silk from decades of handling. Inside, rare herbs and crystals caught the moonlight: bloodstone, moonstone, dried wolf's bane, and powdered unicorn horn that most would dismiss as myth. Magda knew better. Her grandmother, Ileana, had taught her that some truths were too dangerous for common knowledge. "The old ways run in our blood, little one," Ileana had whispered during those long winter evenings when Magda was barely 7. "But the world has grown afraid of what it cannot understand. We must be careful, always careful." Magda traced the edge of a smooth bloodstone with her fingertip, remembering. Ileana had been the village's midwife before her, respected but whispered about. People came to her when their prayers weren't enough, when the physician from the nearest town was too far away and death walked too close. They brought their birthing women, their fevered children, their husbands wasting away from mysterious ailments, and Ileana healed them with hands that seemed to draw sickness away like drawing poison from a wound. But they never invited her to their celebrations afterward, never asked her to join their harvest festivals or wedding dances. They took her healing and kept their distance, as if kindness might somehow contaminate their normal lives. Magda understood that isolation intimately. She had inherited more than her grandmother's cottage, and her healing knowledge she had inherited the loneliness that came with being necessary but never truly welcomed. The cottage itself reflected this careful separation from village life. Built on the edge of Valcea, where the cobblestone streets gave way to mountain paths, it sat like a guardian between the world of ordinary people and the wild places beyond. From her kitchen window, Magda could see the ancient castle ruins perched on the cliff above, its broken towers stark against the bleeding moon. Most villagers avoided looking at those ruins. They made the sign of the cross when forced to acknowledge them, and hurried past when their errands took them near the mountain paths. But Magda had always found something comforting about the castle's presence. Perhaps because, like her, it was old and weathered, and somehow still standing despite being forgotten by most of the world. A soft knock at her door pulled her from these musings. She glanced at the clock on the mantel past midnight. In her line of work, late-night visitors usually meant urgency. "Magda, are you awake?" The voice belonged to Elena Popescu, young and breathless with worry. "Please, I need your help." Magda opened the door to find Elena clutching her rounded belly, her husband Georga hovering anxiously beside her. At 19, Elena still had the fresh beauty of youth, with dark hair that caught starlight and eyes bright with hope, despite her current distress. She was 6 months along with her first child and had been coming to Magda for guidance since the pregnancy began. "The baby!" Elena gasped. "Something's wrong. The movements are so strange tonight, like it's dancing to music. I can't hear." Magda invited them inside, noting how the bloodstone in her grandmother's pouch seemed to pulse with faint light. She had learned to pay attention to such signs. "Come, let me examine you properly. Georga, put the kettle on, would you?" As she guided Elena to the comfortable chair by the fire, Magda caught sight of something that made her pause. Through the window, she could see other cottage windows glowing with lamplight throughout the village. She wasn't the only one awake on this strange night. "The animals have been acting oddly all evening," Georga said as he fumbled with the kettle. "Our goats won't settle and the chickens are making such noise. Even old Vasily's dog won't stop howling." Magda nodded thoughtfully as she placed gentle hands on Elena's belly. The baby was indeed moving with unusual vigor, and there was something else, a warmth that seemed to pulse in rhythm with Elena's heartbeat, but stronger, more purposeful. "Tell me about your dreams lately," Magda said softly, her hands mapping the baby's position with practiced skill. Elena's eyes widened. "How did you know? They've been so vivid. I dream of silver, light, and ancient voices singing lullabies in a language I don't recognize. And sometimes," she hesitated, glancing at her husband, "sometimes I dream of a woman with my grandmother's face, but younger, and she's teaching me things about protection and blessing and old words that taste like honey on my tongue." The bloodstone in the healing pouch pulsed brighter. Magda felt the familiar tingle that meant she was touching something beyond the ordinary world, the same sensation she'd felt as a child when her grandmother worked her deeper magic. "Your baby is strong and healthy," Magda assured them both. "What you're feeling is awakening. Some children are born with gifts, with connections to the old ways. It seems your little one will be special." She didn't mention that such awakenings often coincided with significant supernatural events, or that the blood moon overhead was known to stir powers that had been dormant for generations. As she prepared a calming tea for Elena, Magda's thoughts drifted to her own lost child. 23 years ago, she had been married to a kind blacksmith named Petru. For 3 brief, shining years, she had known what it felt like to be chosen, to be wanted not for her healing abilities, but for herself. When she became pregnant, she had dared to hope that her life might follow a different path than her grandmother's solitary existence. But some gifts came with a price. The baby had been born with abilities that frightened even Magda, a child who could see through the veils between worlds, who spoke to spirits before she could properly speak to the living. The village priest had called it demonic, the physician from town had called it madness, and Petru, torn between love and fear, had called it a burden too heavy to bear. The marriage had crumbled under the weight of fear and misunderstanding. Petru had left for the city, and Magda's daughter, Anna, had been taken to live with distant relatives who promised to pray the strangeness out of her. Magda never saw either of them again. The loss had carved a hollow place in her heart that never quite healed. She poured her maternal instincts into her work, becoming the village's guardian in ways both seen and unseen. But she never again allowed herself to hope for the kind of love that might ask her to choose between her nature and her happiness. Now, watching Elena rest peacefully as the herbal tea worked its gentle magic, Magda felt that old ache stirring. This young woman was experiencing the same awakening that had cost Magda so dearly, but perhaps times had changed. Perhaps this generation would be more accepting of gifts that couldn't be explained in Sunday sermons. "Will she be all right?" Georga asked quietly, his love for his wife evident in every worried line of his face. "She'll be fine," Magda promised. "But you should know that your child will likely be different, sensitive to things others cannot perceive. It's a gift, not a curse, but it will require understanding and patience. Georga nodded seriously. My grandfather used to say that some children are born with one foot in this world and one in the next. He said they bring blessings if they're loved properly. Magda smiled, feeling some of her old grief ease. Perhaps this young father would prove wiser than those who had come before. As Elena and Georgi prepared to leave, the young woman caught Magda's hand. You've been alone for so long, she said, with the startling directness of pregnancy. But I don't think you're meant to stay that way. The dreams, sometimes they show me things about people I care about. And I see you walking in silver light, with someone tall and kind beside you. Someone who sees all of you and isn't afraid. Before Magda could respond, Elena and Georga were gone, leaving her alone with the blood moon and the strange electricity that seemed to dance in the air tonight. She returned to her kitchen table, running her fingers over her grandmother's healing tools and thinking about the young woman's words. At 57, Magda had long since given up dreams of companionship. The mirror showed her a face marked by time and sorrow, a body that had never conformed to the village's ideas of beauty even in her youth. She was practical, useful, necessary, but not the sort of woman men noticed, let alone desired. The wolves' song rose again from the mountains, closer now and more complex. It sounded almost like a summons, a call to something her blood recognized, even if her mind couldn't name it. The bloodstone in her grandmother's pouch blazed with sudden intensity, and for a moment the cottage filled with silver light that made every shadow dance. Magda stood slowly, drawn to the window by a compulsion she couldn't resist. The castle ruins were glowing now, faint but unmistakable, as if ancient stones remembered how to hold starlight. The blood moon hung directly above the highest tower, and something moved in that crimson glow, a figure too distant to identify but somehow familiar, as if she had been waiting all her life to see it. Her heart hammered against her ribs as understanding dawned. The stories were true, the legends were real. And tonight, on this blood moon that painted the world in shades of destiny, everything was about to change. She pressed her palm against the window glass and whispered the words her grandmother had taught her long ago, words for protection, for courage, for opening herself to possibilities beyond the safe, small boundaries of ordinary life. Whatever comes, she murmured to the night, let me be ready. The wolves howled their approval, and somewhere in the distance, ancient magic began to stir. The air itself seemed to thicken as the blood moon reached its zenith. Magda felt the change like pressure in her bones, a humming vibration that made her teeth ache, and her grandmother's bloodstone pendant, discovered just hours ago in the hidden compartment of the healing pouch, burn against her chest, where she had instinctively clasped it. She had found the pendant while reorganizing her grandmother's herbs, drawn by an inexplicable urge to search deeper than she ever had before. The bloodstone was the size of a robin's egg, set in silver that seemed to hold its own inner light. The moment her fingers touched it, memories that weren't her own flooded through her mind, images of her grandmother as a young woman, standing in moonlight beside a tall figure whose face remained shadowed, but whose presence radiated ancient power. Now the pendant pulsed like a second heartbeat, growing warmer with each passing moment. Through her cottage windows, Magda watched as the village animals continued their strange behavior. Dogs howled in harmonies that hurt to hear. Cats stalked through the streets with their backs arched, hissing at empty air. Even the rats had fled their usual hiding places, streaming out of the village in waves of panicked grey fur. Father Constantine's church bell began tolling on its own, the bronze voice echoing off the mountain peaks in a rhythm that matched no earthly call to prayer. One by one, cottage windows flickered to life as villagers woke to the unnatural symphony filling the night air. Magda stepped outside, drawn by forces she couldn't name or resist. The blood moon's light felt thick as honey on her skin, and she could see things moving in its crimson glow, shadows that fell upward, mists that coiled against gravity, and in the distance, a procession of lights ascending from the village graveyard like earthbound stars seeking their way home. The temperature plummeted without warning. Her breath came out in clouds, and frost began forming on the grass despite the late summer warmth that had blessed the day. The bloodstone pendant blazed against her chest, so hot now it nearly burned, but she couldn't bring herself to remove it. It felt like an anchor, the only solid thing in a world that was rapidly becoming something else entirely. From the direction of the castle ruins came a sound that made her soul recognize truths. Her mind had never learned the slow, deliberate toll of a bell that had been silent for 3 centuries. Each resonant note seemed to wake something deeper in the mountain itself. The ground beneath her feet trembled subtly, not with earthquake violence, but with the patient stirring of something vast and old. Magda's cottage windows began to rattle in their frames. Inside, her carefully organized herbs and tinctures trembled on their shelves, and she could hear the soft tinkle of glass as some containers shifted against each other. But nothing broke, nothing fell. It was as if the ancient power awakening knew to be gentle with the tools of healing. The wolves' song changed, becoming more complex, more purposeful. Individual voices wove together in harmonies that spoke of pack loyalty, of protection, of old alliances honored across the centuries. And underneath their wild chorus, Magda heard something else. The whisper of wings passing overhead, though no birds flew in the blood moon's light. She looked up to see shapes moving across the crimson disk, too large and graceful to be any creature that should exist in her safe, predictable world. They moved like shadows with substance, like dreams given form, and they were descending toward the village with deliberate intent. The bloodstone pendant suddenly flared with silver light, so bright it cut through the red moonbeams like a beacon. The moment that light touched the world around her, everything changed. She could see the village as it truly was, not just the cluster of stone cottages and cobbled streets, but the layers of history and magic that had accumulated here over the centuries. Glowing lines of power ran beneath the streets like underground rivers, connecting the church to the graveyard, to the castle ruins, in a pattern that spoke of deliberate design. Each cottage sat at a point where these lines of force intersected, and she understood suddenly that Valcea had been built not by chance, but by ancient knowledge. Her own cottage blazed like a small sun in this hidden map of power. It sat at the convergence of 7 different streams of magical energy, a position that marked it as something far more important than a simple healer's dwelling. This was a guardian's post, a watchtower between worlds, and she had been living in it all her life without understanding its true purpose. The realization staggered her. Everything she thought she knew about her quiet, unremarkable existence crumbled away like old paper. She wasn't just the village midwife, she was the inheritor of something far older and more significant. The bloodstone pendant grew almost unbearably hot against her skin, as if responding to her new understanding. Above the castle ruins, the blood moon pulsed once like a beating heart, and the ancient stones began to glow, with the same silver light that blazed from her pendant. The glow spread slowly at first, then more rapidly, until the entire structure stood outlined against the sky like a constellation fallen to earth. And from within that silver radiance, a figure emerged. Even at this distance, Magda could see that he was tall and moved with the fluid grace of predators and dancers. His dark hair caught the moonlight like black silk, and when he turned toward the village, toward her, she felt the weight of his attention like a physical touch. The bloodstone pendant blazed so brightly now that silver light spilled between her fingers as she clutched it. He was looking directly at her cottage, directly at her, though the distance should have made such focus impossible. Their eyes met across the space between castle and village, and Magda felt something shift in the very fabric of the world. Recognition flared between them, not the simple acknowledgement of strangers, seeing each other, but the deeper knowledge of souls that had been waiting lifetimes to meet again. The pendant's silver light pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, and she understood with crystalline certainty that this moment had been written in fate long before she was born. Lord Radu, for who else could it be raised, one hand in greeting or summoning? The gesture was subtle, almost casual, but it sent waves of power rippling through the magical currents that connected the castle to her cottage. Every protection spell her grandmother had woven into these walls hummed to life, not in defense but in welcome. The village dogs fell silent all at once, leaving only the wolves' distant song and the tolling of ancient bells. In the sudden quiet, Magda heard footsteps on the cobblestones, measured, unhurried, coming closer with each beat of her racing heart. She knew she should go inside, lock her door, hide behind the protections her grandmother had built into every stone and timber of this place. That would be the sensible thing, the safe thing, the choice that would preserve the small, predictable life she had built from the ruins of her earlier dreams. Instead, she found herself walking toward the village square, drawn by compulsions older than thought. The bloodstone pendant had grown warm rather than burning now, a gentle heat that felt like approval, like coming home after a long journey through foreign lands. Other cottage doors were opening. She could see villagers peering out nervously, some making the sign of the cross, others clutching whatever protective charms they owned, but none of them stepped outside. None of them walked toward whatever was coming with the measured confidence of someone who belonged in this moment. Only Magda moved through the silver-touched streets, her feet finding the path as if she had walked it 1,000 times before. The bloodstone pendant lit her way like a gentle star, and with each step she felt more certain that everything in her life had been leading to this encounter. The footsteps grew closer, echoing off stone walls with the patient rhythm of someone who had all the time in the world and knew exactly where he was going. Somewhere behind her, a cottage door slammed shut. Someone whispered a prayer. A baby cried briefly and then fell silent. But Magda walked on, following the silver light and the pull of destiny toward whatever waited for her in the heart of the blood moon night. Lord Radu emerged from the shadows between the cottages like moonlight given form. Up close, he was both more and less than Magda had expected, tall, yes, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort, but there was something unexpectedly gentle in his dark eyes. He moved with careful grace, as if conscious that his very existence might frighten those around him. His clothes spoke of another era, a long coat that might have been fashionable 2 centuries ago, boots that had walked through, more history than any mortal man could claim, and around his throat a silver pendant that matched the bloodstone hanging against Magda's chest. When their pendants caught the crimson moonlight, they pulsed in perfect synchronization. "Magda Thorne," he said, and her name sounded different in his voice, older, weighted with significance she had never known it carried. "Daughter of Elena, granddaughter of Ileana, I have been waiting for you to awaken." The words should have terrified her. A stranger emerging from legends, knowing her lineage, speaking of awakening as if he had been watching her sleep for decades. Instead, Magda felt an odd sense of homecoming, as if the scattered pieces of her life were finally arranging themselves into a pattern she could understand. "Lord Radu," she inclined her head with instinctive courtesy, "the stories say you sleep between blood moons. What has awakened you now?" A smile touched his lips, brief but genuine. "You have. Your power has been growing stronger these past months, calling to the old protections. The village needs its guardian fully awakened, and that awakening requires cooperation." Behind them, cottage shutters creaked as villagers tried to peer out without being seen. Magda was acutely aware that this conversation would be whispered about for generations, assuming any of them survived to do the whispering. But Radu seemed unconcerned by their audience, his attention focused entirely on her. "Guardian, she repeated slowly. I'm a midwife. You are both. You have always been both, though you were allowed to forget. His gaze grew thoughtful. May I show you something? It requires trust, but I think you are ready for truth. Magda found herself nodding before her rational mind could object. Radu extended his hand, pale but warm when she clasped it, and the world changed around them. The village square dissolved, replaced by the interior of what must be Father Constantin's private study. But this version of the study existed in some other time, lit by candles and filled with books that looked far older than any the current priest possessed. A younger Constantin sat hunched over a massive leather-bound volume, his face creased with worry rather than age. This was 20 years ago. Radu's voice came from beside her, though the scene felt too real to be mere vision. When your power first began to manifest after your daughter's birth, the good father was researching ways to help you understand what you were experiencing. In the vision, Constantin turned a page and pointed to an illuminated manuscript page showing a woman in medieval dress standing beside a tall, dark figure. The woman wore a pendant identical to Magda's bloodstone, and silver light flowed from her hands toward a group of kneeling villagers. The Chronicle of the Guardians, Radu continued, your family's true history, hidden in the church archives for 3 centuries. Constantin has been its keeper, waiting for the time when you would need to know. The vision shifted, showing Constantin carefully copying passages into a smaller book, his hand cramped from hours of careful work. Magda recognized his handwriting, the same precise script she had seen on birth certificates and blessing certificates throughout her life. He was preparing to tell you, Radu said softly, but then your husband grew frightened, and your daughter was taken away, and you withdrew so deeply into ordinary life that your power went dormant again. Constantin decided to wait. The scene faded, leaving them once more in the moonlit square. Magda staggered slightly as the transition completed, and Radu's hand on her elbow steadied her with careful gentleness. The book, she whispered. Does it still exist? Hidden beneath the altar stone. Constantin feared that telling you too much too soon might drive you away entirely, as it did your mother before you. Radu's expression grew sad. The gift often skips generations when fear overwhelms love. Magda thought of her own mother, who had died when she was barely 12, a woman who had always seemed nervous around Ileana's healing work, who had insisted that Magda learn practical skills alongside her grandmother's mysterious teachings, a woman who had flinched whenever the old power flickered to life in her daughter's hands. What am I supposed to guard against? She asked. Not against, for Radu gestured toward the sleeping village around them. This place sits at the convergence of several magical streams. That makes it a beacon for those who would use such power for harm, but also a sanctuary for those who need protection. Your family has maintained the balance for centuries. And you? I am bound to this place by oaths older than memory. When the first of your bloodline came to Valcea, she made a pact with my kind. We would protect the village from supernatural threats, and her descendants would maintain the magical protections that keep the convergence stable. It sounded so simple when he explained it, but Magda could feel the weight of generations pressing down on this moment. The blood moon, that's when the pact renews. When it can renew. The bloodline must be strong enough, willing enough. His dark eyes met hers with startling directness. Your grandmother's power was considerable, but she never had children who could inherit the full gift. It passed to you, but circumstances drove me away from it, Magda finished. Until now. Until now, he inclined his head. The question is whether you are prepared to accept what you were born to be. Around them, the village seemed to hold its breath. Even the wolves had fallen silent, and the blood moon hung overhead like a great eye waiting for her decision. Magda thought of Elena's baby, stirring with unnatural awareness. Of the other children who might be born with gifts, who would need someone who understood to guide them. Of the hollow loneliness that had defined her life since she chose safety over truth. If I agree, what happens to my life as I know it? It becomes fuller, more dangerous, certainly, but also more purposeful. Radu's voice carried gentle honesty. You would never again need to hide what you are or apologize for abilities others cannot understand, and you would have a partner in the work, if you choose to accept one. The weight of his meaning settled between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Magda studied his face in the crimson moonlight, the sharp cheekbones, the patient eyes that had seen centuries pass, the mouth that spoke of loneliness as deep as her own. A partner? She repeated carefully. The pact was always meant to be renewed by two, guardian and protector, working in harmony. Your grandmother managed alone, but at great cost. The magic works better when it flows between willing allies. Before Magda could respond, a child's cry split the night air, sharp with pain and fear. Both of them turned toward the sound, and she saw Radu's expression shift from patient explanation to sharp concern. "Elena," Magda breathed, recognizing the voice beneath the cry. "Something's wrong with the baby." Without another word, she ran toward the Popescu cottage, trusting that Radu would follow. Behind them, the blood moon pulsed like a heart, keeping time for the crisis ahead. Elena's cottage blazed with lamplight, and through the windows Magda could see Gheorghe pacing frantically while his wife writhed on their bed, clutching her swollen belly. The sight sent ice through Magda's veins. She had seen this before, the way magical children sometimes fought to be born when the supernatural tides were running high. "Stay back," she told Radu as they reached the door. "Your presence might intensify whatever's happening." But Elena's voice called out before he could respond. "No. Bring him in. I can feel him. He's supposed to be here." Magda exchanged a startled glance with Radu. Most mortals found vampires deeply unsettling, even ones bound by protective oaths. That Elena was calling for his presence suggested the baby's abilities were already stronger than Magda had anticipated. Inside, they found Elena propped against pillows, her face pale but determined. An intricate moon phase calendar lay spread across the foot of the bed, a family heirloom Magda had never seen before, its silver and gold markings gleaming in the lamplight. The calendar was ancient, marked with symbols that predated Christian influence in the region. "My grandmother's calendar," Elena gasped between contractions. "I found it tonight, hidden in our cellar. The moment I touched it, I understood the baby isn't due for months, but the blood moon is calling to her. She wants to be born now, under this power." Radu moved to examine the calendar, his expression growing thoughtful. "This is Dwemer work," he murmured, "crafted by the Star Watchers who built the star. First settlements here. It maps not just the moon's phases, but the ebb and flow of magical currents." Magda knelt beside Elena, placing gentle hands on the distended belly. The baby's movements had taken on an almost rhythmic quality, as if she were dancing to music only she could hear. But there was something else, a warmth that pulsed in time with the contractions, growing stronger with each wave. "She's trying to synchronize with the blood moon," Magda realized. "But it's too early. Her body isn't ready." "Then we help her get ready," Elena said with surprising firmness. "Look at the calendar. Tonight's convergence won't happen again for another generation. If she's meant to be born under this power, then that's what we do." Gheorghe stopped pacing to stare at his wife. "Elena, you could die. The baby could die. This isn't natural." "Nothing about our child is going to be natural," Elena replied, reaching for his hand. "I've been having visions for weeks. I see her grown, working alongside Magda, healing people the physicians can't touch. She's meant for this work, but only if she's born under the right stars." Magda looked between them, remembering her own lost daughter and the fear that had driven her family apart. But here was a young couple facing the unknown with courage instead of terror. It made her heart ache with old grief and new hope. "There are risks," she said carefully. Magic this strong can overwhelm a child who isn't ready. And birth magic, it can change the mother as well as the child. Change how? Georgi asked. Radu answered quietly. She might develop abilities of her own. The bloodlines often awaken when magical children are born to them. Elena could find herself seeing things others cannot, sensing supernatural currents, perhaps even healing in ways that go beyond normal medicine. Elena's eyes lit up despite her pain. Like you, Magda? The question hung between them, weighted with years of careful secrecy. Magda thought of all the times she had bitten back, words of warning when women came to her with pregnancies that felt different, times she had guided her hands by instinct rather than training, and seen results that couldn't be explained by her mundane education. Yes, she said finally. Like me. Another contraction seized Elena, stronger than before, and the baby's responding movement sent ripples of silver light across her belly, visible to all of them now as the blood moon's power intensified. The ancient calendar began to glow faintly, its markings shifting like a living map. The convergence is strengthening, Radu observed. We need to make a decision quickly. Either we help channel this power safely, or we risk losing both mother and child to magical overflow. Magda closed her eyes, feeling for the threads of power that ran through the cottage, the village, the mountain itself. Elena was right. This was a once-in-a-generation opportunity. A child born under tonight's blood, Moon would have abilities that could help protect and guide the next wave of magical awakening. But it would require her to fully embrace her own heritage, to stop hiding behind the safe mask of ordinary midwifery and acknowledge what she really was. I'll need my grandmother's tools, she said, opening her eyes to meet Elena's grateful gaze. And we'll have to trust each other completely. Once we begin, there's no going back to the way things were. I understand, Elena whispered. We both do. Georga nodded, though Magda could see the fear warring with love in his expression. Tell us what you need. As Magda sent him running to her cottage for the healing pouch and its mystical contents, she found herself working beside Radu with an ease that surprised her. He seemed to understand her needs before she voiced them, supporting Elena's shoulders when the contractions peaked, monitoring the calendar's shifting patterns, murmuring words in an ancient language that somehow helped stabilize the magical currents. You've done this before, she realized as she prepared the protective circle they would need. Not exactly, but I've assisted at births of power for longer than this village has existed. The principles remain the same: channel the energy, protect the vulnerable, welcome new life with all the blessing you can muster. There was something deeply moving about working alongside someone who understood not just her abilities, but the weight of responsibility that came with them. For the first time in decades, Magda felt like she had a true partner, someone who could share both the burden and the joy of guardian work. As Elena's labor intensified and the blood moon reached its peak, Magda realized that tonight would change all of them. The baby would be born into power, Elena would awaken to her own abilities, and Magda herself would finally stop running from the truth of what she was meant to be. The question was whether she was brave enough to let this man, this ancient protector, become part of that truth as well. Another contraction gripped Elena, and silver light blazed from the calendar as the moment of birth approached. 3 hours past midnight, little Anca Popescu entered the world with eyes that reflected starlight and a cry that harmonized with the wolves still singing in the mountains. The birth had been unlike anything Magda had ever witnessed. Silver light poured from Elena's hands as she labored. The baby emerged, surrounded by a faint aura of protection. And the moment Anca drew her first breath, every magical artifact in the cottage blazed with welcoming energy. Now, as Elena rested peacefully with her daughter nursing contentedly at her breast, Magda sat in her own kitchen with Radu, sharing tea and trying to process what they had accomplished together. On the table between them lay Radu's memory crystal, a clear stone, the size of a child's fist that pulsed with gentle inner light. "She's magnificent," Magda said softly, thinking of the baby's unusual alertness, the way Anka had seemed to recognize both her and Radu despite being mere hours old. But what happens now? The village will notice that something extraordinary occurred. Radu touched the memory crystal, and images began to flow within its depths like captured dreams. "May I show you something? It might help you understand why tonight was so significant." When Magda nodded, he placed his hand over the crystal, and the kitchen filled with visions of the past. She saw the village as it had been centuries ago, smaller, more primitive, but glowing with the same network of magical currents. And she saw herself, or someone who might have been her ancestor, working alongside a younger version of Radu to protect the settlement from things that prowled in the darkness. The memory shifted, showing her glimpses of other blood moon births throughout the centuries. Each time, a child born with gifts had grown to become a guardian, a healer, a bridge between the magical and mundane worlds. And each time, the vampire lord and the human guardian had worked in partnership to ensure the village's safety. "We've done this before," she whispered, watching her own face in a medieval gown as she tended to a laboring woman while Radu held protective magic around them. "Not us, but our predecessors. The bloodlines run deep, and sometimes souls find their way back to purposes left unfinished." Radu's voice carried centuries of patient loneliness. "I have been waiting through many generations for a guardian strong enough to fully restore the partnership." The visions faded, leaving them in the quiet kitchen. Outside, dawn was beginning to touch the eastern peaks, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that seemed gentle after the night's supernatural intensity. But Magda could still feel the change in the air power flowing more freely, protections settling into new patterns, the village itself adjusting to the Safa, presence of a newly awakened magical child. "The baby will need training," she said practically, "and Elena, I could see her abilities manifesting during the birth. She'll need guidance too, as will others. Anka's birth under the blood moon will awaken dormant gifts throughout the village. Children who showed small signs of sensitivity will find their abilities growing stronger. Adults, who always felt there was something different about this place, will begin to see the currents of power that run beneath ordinary life." The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Magda had grown used to being the only one who truly understood the mystical side of village life. Having others share that awareness would mean the end of her careful isolation, but also the end of carrying such responsibility alone. "And you?" she asked, studying his patient expression. "What do you need from this partnership?" Radu was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the crystal's surface. "For 3 centuries, I have maintained the supernatural defenses of this place alone. It's a weight that grows heavier with each passing year. The threats are changing, growing more sophisticated. I need—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I need what I had in the old partnerships. Someone who understands the work, but brings a different perspective to it. Someone who can touch the human side of protection while I handle the supernatural threats. Someone to share the loneliness with," Magda said gently. His eyes met hers with startling directness. "Yes, though I know that asking you to bind your life to mine is complicated. I am not human, despite appearances. I do not age as you do, and there are aspects of my nature that might disturb you once the novelty wears off." Magda found herself smiling at his careful honesty. "Radu, I am 57 years old, past the age where I worry about conventional romance or traditional marriage. What I want is purpose, partnership, and perhaps, if we're fortunate, the kind of understanding that comes when 2 people share meaningful work." The relief that crossed his features was almost boyish. "You don't find my nature troubling?" I find it remarkable that you've spent centuries protecting people who mostly forgot you existed. That speaks to character more than species." She reached across the table to touch the memory crystal, watching new images swirl within its depths, glimpses of possible futures, moments of shared magic and quiet companionship. "Besides, I've always been better at seeing people's hearts than their appearances." A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Magda could see villagers emerging from their homes, talking in excited clusters and pointing toward the castle ruins. In the growing daylight, the ancient stones still held a faint silver glow, and there were other changes, visible gardens that had bloomed overnight with flowers that shouldn't exist, water wells that ran clearer and sweeter than they had in decades, and an overall sense of vitality that made everything seem more vivid. "They'll have questions," Radu said, rising to look out the window with her. "Then we'll have answers. Together." Magda stood beside him, close enough to feel the subtle warmth that radiated from his skin. "But first, I want to see Elena and make sure both she and the baby are adjusting well to their new abilities." As they walked toward the Popescu cottage, through streets that hummed with gentle magic, Magda realized that for the first time in decades, she was looking forward to the future. The village was awakening to its magical heritage. She had a partner who understood both the wonder and the responsibility of their work, and there was a new generation being born who would grow up unashamed of their gifts. It was, she thought, exactly the kind of impossible happiness she had trained herself not to hope for. 2 weeks after Anka's birth, Magda found herself standing in her grandmother's hidden cellar, holding the ancestral grimoire, a leather-bound tome that had materialized from beneath loose floorboards, as if responding to her newfound confidence in her magical heritage. The book felt warm in her hands, its pages whispering with accumulated wisdom from generations of guardian women. "Look at this," she called to Radu, who was examining the protective wards carved into the cellar walls. "My grandmother documented everything: birth blessings, protection spells, even recipes for strengthening magical children's abilities as they grow." The grimoire had appeared 3 nights ago, simply sitting on her kitchen table when she woke. No explanation, no dramatic revelation, just the patient offering of knowledge that had been waiting for her to be ready to receive it. Since then, she had spent every spare moment learning the formal structure behind magic she had always practiced by instinct. Radu moved to look over her shoulder, his presence both comforting and distractingly warm. "Your family's tradition is more sophisticated than I realized. These protection formulas are brilliant. They work with a child's natural development rather than imposing artificial constraints." "Elena's been asking about training for herself and Anka," Magda said, turning a page to reveal detailed illustrations of magical theory. "And Father Constantin brought his nephew yesterday, 10 years old, and suddenly seeing auras around everyone in the village. The awakening is spreading exactly as you predicted." It was true. Each day brought new signs that the supernatural barriers between worlds were thinning. Children reported vivid dreams that turned out to be glimpses of the future. Adults found themselves knowing things about their neighbors they had never been told. Even the village animals seemed more intelligent, more attuned to human emotions and needs. "Constantin himself is manifesting," Radu said quietly. "Yesterday, I watched him bless a sick cow back to health with nothing but prayer and intention. The man has always had latent abilities, now they're finally surfacing." Magda smiled, thinking of the priest's amazed delight when his patient faith had suddenly produced tangible results. "He asked me to teach him to control it. A 70-year-old man, eager as a schoolboy to learn new skills." "Will you?" "Of course. That's what this is for, isn't it?" She gestured to the grimoire and the cellar around them. All of this knowledge was preserved so it could be shared when the time was right. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Magda copying key passages into smaller notebooks for distribution, while Radu strengthened the protective wards that kept the cellar hidden from casual discovery. The intimacy of shared purpose was something she had never experienced before. The way he anticipated her needs, how naturally they divided complex tasks between them, the gentle communication that happened with glances and gestures rather than words. "Magda," he said eventually, his tone carefully casual, "there's something I should tell you about the bond we're developing." She looked up from her copying, noting the slight tension in his shoulders. "What about it?" "Partnership magic. When two people work together as closely as we have been, it creates connections that go beyond the professional. I can sense your emotions sometimes, feel when you're troubled or excited or content, and you've been responding to my moods as well, haven't you?" It was true, though she hadn't thought to comment on it. Lately, she had found herself knowing when he was approaching her cottage before she could see or hear him, feeling his presence like warmth at the edge of her consciousness. When he was dealing with supernatural threats in the mountains, she felt restless until he returned. When she was teaching the children, his satisfaction echoed in her own heart. "Is that problematic?" she asked. "Not problematic, but permanent. Once fully established, these bonds don't fade. Even if we chose to end our partnership, we would remain connected in ways that might complicate future relationships." Magda set down her pen and studied his face. "Are you having second thoughts about working with me?" "No." The answer came swiftly, almost before she finished the question. "No, absolutely not. I'm asking if you might have second thoughts once you understand what we're moving toward, which is a true magical marriage, not the human ceremony, though we could have that as well if you wished, but a bond that would make us genuine partners in every sense. Our magic would strengthen each other's, our lifespans would begin to synchronize, and our souls would be intertwined." The word hung between them, weighted with centuries of meaning she was only beginning to understand. Magda thought of the loneliness that had defined her adult life, the careful distance she had maintained from everyone around her, the assumption that she would live and die with her heart safely protected behind walls of practiced solitude. "What would that mean for my mortality?" she asked practically. "Extended, not eliminated. You would age more slowly than normal humans, but faster than I do. Eventually, we would reach an equilibrium, perhaps appearing to be in our 30s or 40s for several centuries before aging began again. And the alternative? We continue as we are partners in work, but not in life. Close allies who care for each other but maintain separate existences." His voice carried careful neutrality, but she could feel the hope he was trying to hide. Either path would serve the village's needs. Magda closed the grimoire gently and moved to where he stood beside the carved wards. This close, she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, smell the faint scent of mountain air and old magic that clung to his skin. When she reached up to touch his face, he leaned into the contact like a man starved for gentle affection. "Radu," she said softly, "I spent 30 years convincing myself that I was meant to be alone, that wanting more than duty and service was selfish. But these past weeks with you, I've remembered what it feels like to be part of something larger than myself, and I find I'm not nearly as resigned to solitude as I thought I was." She smiled at his expression of cautious hope. "Besides, the children will need guides who understand partnership as well as power. We should probably set a good example." His arms came around her waist with careful reverence, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "Are you certain?" "I'm 57 years old, Radu. I've learned to be certain of what matters." She rose on her toes to press a gentle kiss to his lips. "You matter. This work matters. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Above them, she could hear the sounds of village life continuing as normal children playing, chickens clucking, the rhythmic thunk of an axe splitting wood. But down in the hidden cellar, surrounded by centuries of accumulated wisdom, two ancient souls finally found their way back to each other. Father Constantine arrived at Magda's cottage just as the evening stars were appearing, clutching a scroll that seemed to glow with its own inner light. His weathered face was flushed with excitement and worry in equal measure, and when he spoke, his voice trembled with the weight of revelation. "Magda, child, I've been such a fool. All these years, keeping secrets I thought were protecting you, when I should have—" He stopped, pressing the scroll into her hands. "This is the true prophecy, not the fragments I've been sharing, but the complete text. I found it tonight, sealed behind a false wall in the church archives." Radu appeared in the doorway behind her, drawn by the urgency in the old priest's voice. "Constantin? What happened?" "Everything I thought I knew was wrong." Constantin collapsed into a kitchen chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. The prophecy about bearing an heir, it was never about biological children, never about carrying on bloodlines in the traditional sense. Magda unrolled the scroll with trembling fingers. The true prophecy was written in multiple languages, Latin, Old Romanian, and symbols that predated both. As her eyes moved across the ancient words, understanding dawned with crystalline clarity. "By blood moon shall the guardian awaken to her true purpose," she read aloud. "She shall bear not a child of flesh, but children of spirit, awakening the dormant gifts in those she guides, midwifing the birth of a new generation of magical protectors." The words continued, describing not a single birth, but a transformation of the entire village. The heir wasn't one special child, but dozens of awakened souls who would carry forward the ancient traditions. And Magda's role wasn't to produce this new generation through her own body, but to help others discover and develop their latent abilities. "Elena's daughter," Radu said quietly. "She was the first, but not the only one." "Look at the date," Constantin urged, pointing to markings at the scroll's edge. "This prophecy was sealed away 300 years ago, right after the last Great Awakening. They hid it because they feared what would happen if people understood too much too quickly." Magda sank into her own chair, mind reeling. Everything she had assumed about her purpose, about what had been asked of her, shifted into new patterns. The awakening wasn't supposed to be limited to noble bloodlines or chosen families. It was meant to spread through the entire community, which explains why so many villagers are manifesting abilities now, Radu added. Anka's birth under the blood moon was the catalyst, but the potential was always there, waiting for the right. With conditions. As the full implications settled over her, Magda felt a mixture of relief and overwhelming responsibility. Relief, because the prophecy hadn't demanded she sacrifice her body or risk the kind of childbearing complications that had cost her so much pain in the past. But the responsibility helping an entire village learn to use abilities they never knew they possessed seemed almost impossibly vast. "There's more," Constantin said gently. "The scroll explains why your own daughter was lost to you." Magda's breath caught. For 23 years, she had carried the guilt of Anna's strange gifts, wondering if she had somehow failed as a mother or passed on something harmful through her bloodline. The previous awakening failed because the guardians tried to force magical development instead of allowing it to unfold naturally. Children born with strong gifts were taken from their families and trained in isolation, away from normal human connections. Constantine's voice grew heavy with old sorrow. "Your Anna wasn't taken because her abilities were dangerous. She was taken because people feared they couldn't control her power if she remained with someone who truly understood it." The revelation hit Magda like a tumas, physical blow. Her daughter hadn't been removed because Magda was an inadequate mother, but because she was too good at nurturing magical development. The authorities had been afraid that Anna would grow too strong, too confident in her abilities, if she remained with someone who could guide her properly. "Where is she now?" Magda whispered. "I don't know." But Constantin hesitated, then reached into his robes to pull out a small piece of paper. This arrived by crow 3 days ago. No signature, but the handwriting. Magda took the paper with shaking hands. The message was brief. Mother, I heard about the awakening. I'm coming home. For a moment, the cottage fell completely silent. Then Magda began to laugh, not with humor, but with the giddy relief of a burden finally lifting. Her daughter was alive. More than alive, she was aware of what was happening in Valcea and choosing to return. The prophecy mentions this too, Radu said, reading over her shoulder. The return of the separated ones, drawn back by the strength of the new awakening. She won't be the only one. Others are coming? Constantine asked. Anyone with magical heritage who was driven away or taken from this place. The awakening calls to them like a beacon. Radu's voice carried centuries of patient observation. I've felt it myself, souls that belong here being drawn back by forces stronger than conscious choice. Magda read through the prophecy again, this time understanding the broader scope of what they were experiencing. Not just individual awakenings, but the restoration of an entire magical community that had been scattered and suppressed for generations. The village was becoming what it had always been meant to be, a sanctuary, where people with unusual gifts could live openly and support each other. The bonding ceremony, she said suddenly, looking at Radu. That's part of this too, isn't it? Not just our personal partnership, but a formal restoration of the alliance between guardian and protector. The ceremony will stabilize the awakening energy and provide a focal point for the new community to gather around, he agreed. But only if you're prepared for what that means. Which is, you'll become the acknowledged leader of a magical village. People will come to you not just for healing, but for guidance, training, conflict resolution, everything that goes with being the heart of a community that exists partially outside normal human society. The weight of it should have terrified her. Instead, Magda felt a deep sense of rightness, as if her life had finally found its proper direction. This was what she had been born for, not to hide her abilities or apologize for being different, but to create a space where others like her could thrive. Anna will need training when she returns, she said practically. 23 years of suppressing her gifts, she'll have much to relearn. We'll help her, Radu promised. All of them. That's what the new generation of protectors is for, to ensure that no one faces their abilities alone again. Constantin rose from his chair with obvious effort. I should return to the church. There will be others coming to ask questions once word of this spreads, and I need to prepare proper answers. After he left, Magda and Radu sat in comfortable quiet, watching the stars brighten outside her window. Everything had changed in the space of an hour, not just their understanding of the prophecy, but their vision of the future they were building together. Are you ready for this? Radu asked eventually. Leading a community is different from healing individuals, more complex, more demanding. Magda thought of Elena learning to use her new abilities to help other mothers, of Constantine discovering that his faith could manifest in tangible ways, of children growing up unashamed of gifts that made them different. Most of all, she thought of Anna coming home to a place where she would finally be understood and welcomed. I've been ready my whole life, she said. I just didn't know what I was getting ready for. Outside, she could hear the wolves singing their ancient songs to the star-filled sky, and for the first time, their voices sounded like celebration rather than warning. The blood moon chalice arrived with Anna. Magda's daughter appeared at the cottage door 3 days before the autumn equinox, carrying nothing but a worn traveling pack and a ceremonial chalice that gleamed with inner silver fire. At 26, Anna had her mother's steady hands and her grandmother's penetrating gaze, but there was something else in her, bearing a confidence that spoke of abilities fully embraced rather than hidden. Mother. The word came soft but clear, weighted with 23 years of separation and forgiveness already offered. I brought something that belongs to our family. something they've been keeping from us. The chalice was ancient beyond memory. Its silver worked with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. As Anna set it on the kitchen table, every magical artifact in the cottage responded. The bloodstone pendant pulsed, the grimoire's pages rustled though no wind stirred them, and even Radu's memory crystal blazed with sudden intensity. The equinox ceremony, Anna explained, settling into the chair that had always been hers, as if she had never left. The chalice is necessary for the ritual that will complete the awakening. The people who took me have been guarding it, waiting for this generation's guardian to prove herself worthy. Magda studied her daughter's face, looking for signs of resentment or bitterness, and finding only a calm determination that reminded her painfully of Ileana. How did you know to bring it now? Because the awakening is incomplete. Anna's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent years studying magical theory in enforced isolation. The village is manifesting individual abilities, but without the proper binding ceremony, the power will eventually become unstable. People will start to lose control, or worse, the energy will attract things that feed on unguarded magic. Radu straightened at this, his protective instincts sharpening. What kind of things? Shadow feeders, dream stealers, entities that exist in the spaces between worlds, and hunger for the kind of raw, magical energy that's been building here. Anna turned to face him with respectful directness. You've been doing remarkable work containing the overflow, but one protector can't hold the barriers indefinitely. The ceremony will create a permanent structure that distributes the protective burden among all the awakened. The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Word of Anna's return spread quickly through the village, bringing a steady stream of visitors to Magda's cottage. Some came out of curiosity, others with questions about their own developing abilities, and a few, like Elena with baby Anka, simply to offer support and assistance. The chalice responds to her, Elena observed, watching 2-month-old Anka reach toward the silver cup with grasping fingers. Look how it glows when she's near. It was true. The baby's presence seemed to activate something in the ancient artifact, causing patterns of light to dance across its surface in rhythms that matched her breathing. Anna, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the infant, nodded thoughtfully. She'll be instrumental in the ceremony. Children born under the blood moon carry the purest form of awakening energy. The chalice will use her natural resonance to amplify the binding magic for the entire community. Magda felt a flutter of maternal anxiety. Is it safe for her to participate? She's so young. Safer than leaving the awakening unbound, Anna replied gently. But I understand your concern. 23 years ago, they convinced everyone that my participation in magic was dangerous. In truth, the danger came from trying to suppress abilities that needed expression. The honesty in her daughter's voice carried no accusation, but Magda still felt the weight of old regrets. Anna, I need you to know letting them take you was the most painful decision I've ever made. If I had understood then what I know now, you would have fought harder. I know. Anna reached across the space between them to clasp Magda's hand. But, Mother, if you had kept me here, neither of us would have been ready for what's happening now. I needed to learn control in a structured environment, and you needed to develop your abilities without the distraction of worrying about mine. It was a remarkably mature perspective from someone who had been separated from her family as a child, but Magda could see the hard-won wisdom in her daughter's eyes. Anna had made peace with their circumstances in ways that allowed her to focus on the present rather than mourn the past. Radu, meanwhile, had been working with Father Constantine and several other village men to prepare the ceremonial space. They had chosen the ancient stone circle that stood on the hill above the church, a ring of standing stones that predated Christian settlement by centuries. When Magda visited the site on the evening before the equinox, she was amazed by the transformation. The stones had been cleaned of moss and lichen, revealing carved symbols that matched those on the chalice. Channels cut into the rock connected each standing stone to a central altar, and the entire circle hummed with barely contained energy. At the cardinal points, braziers waited to be lit with flames that would burn specific herbs according to formulas in the grimoire. "It's beautiful," she told Radu as they stood hand in hand within the circle, "but also terrifying. What if something goes wrong? Then we adapt." His voice carried the calm confidence of someone who had faced countless challenges over the centuries. "Magic is flexible, Magda. Intent matters more than perfect execution. The village needs this binding, and your desire to help them will guide the ritual, even if the details aren't flawless." Around the periphery of the circle, she could see evidence of the community effort that had gone into this preparation. Woven flower garlands contributed by the village women, protective charms crafted by the men, and small offerings left by children who might not fully understand what was happening but sensed its importance. "The entire village will be here tomorrow night," she realized. "Not just the village." Anna's voice came from behind them as she climbed the hill with Elena and baby Anka. "Others are arriving, people with magical heritage who felt the call to return, just as the prophecy predicted." It was true. Over the past 2 days, Magda had met distant cousins who shared her grandmother's gift for healing, a young man whose family had been driven out a generation ago for practicing weather magic, and an elderly woman whose ability to speak with spirits had made her unwelcome in 3 different towns. "How many are we expecting?" Radu asked. 47 so far, with more arriving each hour." Anna shifted baby Anka to her other arm, smiling as the infant reached toward the glowing stones. "By tomorrow night, we may have nearly 100 people participating in the ceremony." The scale was staggering. What Magda had envisioned as an intimate ritual, involving perhaps a dozen village members, had grown into something that would formalize the creation of an entirely new kind of community. The responsibility felt overwhelming, but as she watched Anna confidently discussing ritual logistics with Elena, she realized she wasn't facing this alone. "Mother," Anna said as they prepared to descend the hill, "there's something else you should know. The binding ceremony, it's traditionally performed by a mated pair, guardian and protector, working in harmony to anchor the community's magical structure." Magda glanced at Radu, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "We haven't. That is, we've discussed partnership, but the ceremony itself will complete your bond," Anna continued with practical calm. "By tomorrow night, you'll be connected not just emotionally, but magically. Your lifespans will synchronize, your abilities will complement each other, and your commitment will be sealed in ways that go beyond human marriage contracts." "Are you comfortable with that?" Radu asked quietly. "It's a more formal declaration than we originally discussed." Magda thought of the years she had spent alone, convinced that solitude was her natural state. Then she thought of the past weeks working alongside him, the comfortable intimacy that had developed, and the future they were building together. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," she said, and meant it completely. As they walked back toward the village under the rising stars, Magda felt the weight of tomorrow's ceremony settling around her like a mantle. By this time tomorrow night, everything would be different. The village would be formally established as a magical sanctuary. Dozens of awakened individuals would be bound into a protective community, and she would be united with Radu in a partnership that would define the rest of her extended life. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt only a deep sense of anticipation and the quiet certainty that she was finally becoming who she had always been meant to be. The unity ring appeared at the moment of greatest need. As the sun set on the equinox evening and nearly 100 awakened souls gathered within the ancient stone circle, Magda felt the weight of responsibility threatening to overwhelm her. The assembled crowd included not just villagers, but magical refugees from across the region, healers and weather workers, spirit speakers and herb witches, all drawn by the promise of a community where they could practice their gifts openly. But something was wrong with the ceremonial space. Despite their careful preparations, the magical currents felt chaotic, pulling in different directions rather than flowing in harmony. The blood moon chalice sat on the central altar, its silver surface flickering with uncertain light, and baby Anka, who should have been the ceremony's natural focal point, fussed restlessly in Elena's arms. "The binding isn't taking hold," Anna said quietly, standing beside Magda as they surveyed the gathering crowd. "There are too many different magical traditions trying to merge too quickly. The circle needs a stronger anchor point." Radu moved to join them, his expression tense with concern. "I can feel entities gathering at the edge of the protected space. Shadow feeders, drawn by the unstable energy. If we can't complete the binding soon, they'll find ways through the barriers." The crowd was beginning to sense the difficulty. Conversations grew quieter, nervous glances were exchanged, and some of the more sensitive individuals started moving toward the circle's edge, as if preparing to flee. Magda realized that the entire awakening might collapse if they couldn't find a way to stabilize the ceremony. "What do we need?" she asked Anna desperately. "A formal magical marriage," her daughter replied. "Not just the partnership you and Radu have been developing, but a complete soul-binding witnessed by the community. The unity ring would help if—" "The what?" Magda interrupted. Anna's eyes widened with realization. "You don't have it yet, but you should. Every mated guardian pair receives one when their bond is formalized. It usually appears during the ceremony itself, but—" A new voice cut through the gathering tension. "Looking for this?" An elderly woman stepped forward from the crowd, her silver hair gleaming in the torchlight, and her weathered hands holding a simple gold band that pulsed with gentle warmth. Magda recognized her as one of the magical refugees who had arrived that morning, but now she carried herself with an authority that suggested deeper purpose. "I am Vera Dragana," the woman continued, "keeper of the ancient artifacts for this region. I've been waiting 60 years to deliver this ring to the right guardian." She approached Magda with steady steps. "Your grandmother was my student once, long before you were born. She told me that someday her granddaughter would need the unity ring to complete a binding that would restore our scattered people." The ring felt warm as water when Vera placed it in Magda's palm. The moment her fingers closed around it, the chaotic, magical currents in the circle began to settle into more harmonious patterns. The blood moon chalice blazed with renewed light, and baby Anka stopped fussing as if she could feel the ceremony finding its proper balance. "How does this work?" Magda asked, looking between Anna, Vera, and Radu. "You and Lord Radu exchange vows before the assembled community," Vera explained. "The ring will recognize a true magical partnership and create a permanent bond that serves as an anchor point for everyone else's awakening energies." Radu stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. "Are you certain about this, Magda? Once the binding is complete, there's no undoing it. We'll be connected for the rest of our extended lives." The gathered crowd fell silent, sensing that this moment would determine the success or failure of everything they had worked toward. In the distance, Magda could feel the shadow feeders pressing against the circle's weakening barriers, hungry for the kind of chaotic magical energy that would be released if the ceremony failed. She thought of the village children who were manifesting abilities, of Elena learning to use her gifts to help other mothers, of Anna finally returning to a place where her talents were welcomed rather than feared. Most of all, she thought of the past weeks working alongside Radu and the sense of completeness she had found in their partnership. "I've never been more certain of anything," she said, taking his hands in hers. The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had always belonged there, and immediately she felt Radu's presence expanding in her consciousness, not overwhelming her own thoughts, but joining with them in perfect harmony. Through their shared awareness, she could sense his centuries of patient guardianship, his deep love for the people he protected, and his profound relief at finally having someone who truly understood the weight of his responsibilities. Around them, the magical circle stabilized completely. The shadow feeders retreated, repelled by the unified energy now flowing through the ancient stones. Baby Anka laughed with delight as the ceremonial space filled with gentle silver light, and the assembled crowd began to smile as they felt their own awakening energies settling into sustainable patterns. The real ceremony could finally begin. The protector's mantle materialized as the ceremony reached its crescendo, settling around Magda's shoulders like starlight woven into fabric. The ceremonial cloak appeared just as Father Constantin spoke the final words of blessing over the newly bonded couple, its silver threads catching the light from the blazing chalice and the unity ring's gentle glow. "By the authority of the old ways and the blessing of the new," Constantin intoned, his voice carrying clearly across the stone circle, "I declare this union sealed and this guardianship established. Let all who seek sanctuary know that Valcea stands ready to welcome them home." The mantle felt weightless despite its rich embroidery, which depicted the history of the guardian, bloodline in silver thread on midnight blue silk. As Magda moved, the images seemed to shift and change sometimes, showing her grandmother Ileana working her healing magic, sometimes displaying visions of the work yet to come. Around the circle, the assembled crowd began to sing, not a planned song, but a harmony that rose spontaneously from nearly 100 voices as the binding magic settled into its permanent patterns. The melody was ancient, wordless, carrying the deep satisfaction of a community finally coming home to itself. Elena stepped forward, carrying baby Anka to the altar where the blood moon chalice waited. As the infant's small hands touched the silver rim, light poured from the cup like liquid starfire, flowing along the channels carved into the ancient stones until the entire circle blazed with gentle radiance. "The new generation is blessed," Anna announced, her voice carrying the formal authority of someone trained in ceremonial protocol. "Let all children born of this community be welcomed into their gifts without fear, guided in their growth without shame, and protected in their uniqueness without condition." One by one, other parents brought their children forward, some infants like Anka, others young people whose abilities were just beginning to manifest. Konstantin's 10-year-old nephew, who saw auras around everyone, received a blessing that would help him control and understand his visions. A teenage girl, whose weather sensitivity had been dismissed as moodiness, found herself acknowledged as a potential storm caller worthy of proper training. As each child was blessed, Magda felt their connection to the community settling into place through her bond with Radu. She could sense their unique gifts, their fears and hopes, their need for guidance and acceptance. The unity ring pulsed warm against her finger as she realized that she would know each of these young people as if they were her own children, watching over their development and celebrating their achievements. "The adults who have found their way home," Vera Dragana called out, gesturing to the magical refugees who had traveled from distant places to be part of this gathering. "Let them be welcomed as family returning from a long journey." The blessing that followed was even more moving than the children's ceremony. Men and women who had spent years hiding their abilities, who had been driven from their birth communities or forced to suppress their gifts, stepped forward to be acknowledged for what they truly were. A woman who could speak with the spirits of the dead found herself welcomed as a valuable bridge between worlds. A man whose plant magic had been called witchcraft was celebrated as a potential teacher for the village's agricultural future. With each blessing, the protector's mantle grew warmer, its silver threads recording new connections and responsibilities. Magda understood that she was no longer just the village midwife, or even just a guardian. She had become the heart of a magical community that would continue growing as word spread of Valcea's transformation. "The binding is complete," Radu announced, his voice carrying across the circle with supernatural clarity. Let all who would threaten this sanctuary know that it stands under ancient protection. Let all who seek healing know that skilled hands await them. And let all who have been told their gifts are shameful know that here they will be celebrated. The crowd's response was a roar of approval that echoed off the surrounding mountains. But underneath the celebration, Magda could feel something deeper settling into place, a network of magical connections that would allow the community to support each other, share knowledge, and defend against threats that might emerge in the future. As the formal ceremony concluded and people began to drift toward the village for the feast that Elena and the other women had prepared, Magda found herself standing in the pawn, center of the stone circle with Radu, Anna, and baby Anka. The chalice still glowed softly on the altar, and the unity ring continued to pulse with gentle warmth. "How do you feel?" Anna asked, studying her mother's face in the magical light. "Different," Magda replied honestly. "Fuller, as if I spent my whole life carrying water in a cup with holes in it, and suddenly someone gave me a pitcher that doesn't leak." Radu's arm around her waist tightened slightly, and through their bond she felt his deep contentment. For the first time in centuries, he wasn't carrying the burden of protection alone. For the first time in decades, she wasn't hiding essential parts of herself from the world. "Welcome home, Mother," Anna said softly, and Magda realized that for the first time in her adult life, she truly felt like she belonged exactly where she was. 6 months after the equinox ceremony, Magda sat at her kitchen table with sunlight streaming through windows that now overlooked a thriving, magical village. The new chronicle lay open before her, its blank pages slowly filling with the stories and traditions that would guide future generations. This morning, she was recording the successful birth of twins to one of the refugee families, children born with the rare gift of shared consciousness, who would grow up understanding that their unusual bond was a blessing rather than an affliction. The cottage itself had expanded since the awakening, not through conventional construction, but through magic that responded to genuine need. Rooms had appeared as required a larger kitchen for the communal meals that had become a village tradition, a library where Anna taught magical theory to eager students, and a healing chamber where Magda could work with patients requiring more intensive care. Through the window, she could see Radu working with a group of teenagers in the garden behind the church, teaching them to strengthen plant growth through focused intention. His patient manner with the young people never failed to warm her heart, especially when she remembered his centuries of solitude before their partnership began. "Mother, are you ready for the morning council?" Anna appeared in the doorway, carrying baby Anka on her hip. At 8 months old, Elena's daughter was already showing remarkable abilities. Yesterday she had prevented a cooking pot from falling by simply reaching toward it, her will somehow affecting gravity itself. "Almost finished," Magda replied, writing a final note about the twins' feeding schedule. The new chronicle seemed to absorb her words with satisfaction, its pages organizing information in ways that would make it easily accessible to future guardians. What's on the agenda today? 3 families arriving from the eastern provinces, all with children who need proper magical education. The weather workers want to discuss coordinating their efforts for next month's planting, and Constantine has questions about adapting the church calendar to include celebrations of the magical seasons. It was a typical day in the transformed village of Valcea. What had once been a sleepy mountain community had evolved into a beacon for awakened individuals throughout the region. The population had nearly doubled, but rather than straining resources, the magical gifts of the newcomers had enhanced everyone's quality of life. Gardens produced abundant harvests under the care of plant workers. Illness was rare, thanks to multiple healers with different specialties, and even simple tasks became more efficient when guided by people who could sense the most harmonious ways to accomplish them. "How are Elena and George settling into their new roles?" Magda asked as they walked toward the village square. Wonderfully. Elena's gift for easing difficult births has already saved 3 mothers who wouldn't have survived conventional delivery. And Georg's blacksmithing has improved dramatically since he learned to sense the metal's natural properties. Anna shifted Anka to her other hip as the baby reached toward a butterfly floating past. They're talking about having another child soon. The village square bustled with activity that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. Children played games that involved small displays of magical ability, levitating balls, creating brief rainbows, communicating with the cats that had become unusually intelligent since the awakening. Adults conducted business with a casual use of gifts that enhanced rather than replaced traditional skills. And at the center of it all, the ancient well now flowed with water that carried subtle healing properties, blessing everyone who drank from it. Magda, Father, Constantin approached with his customary smile, but now there was a confidence in his bearing that spoke of faith finally merged with tangible results. I wanted to thank you again for the blessing you placed on young Marcus yesterday. His night terrors have stopped completely. She inclined her head graciously. His gift for seeing across the veils was manifesting too early. The blessing simply helped him control when and how he uses that ability. Still, his parents are deeply grateful, as are all of us. Constantine's expression grew thoughtful. 40 years I preached about divine mysteries and miraculous healing. Now I'm living in the middle of more miracles than most saints ever witnessed, and somehow it feels perfectly natural. It was true. The magical transformation of Valcea had occurred so gradually and organically that it felt like the fulfillment of the village's essential nature rather than a dramatic change. People adapted to new realities with remarkable ease when those realities brought healing, community support, and the freedom to be authentic. As the morning council session progressed, Magda found herself marveling at how naturally she had grown into her leadership role. Decisions were made through consensus, rather than authority, with her guidance serving to help the community find solutions that worked for everyone. The protector's mantle, now a permanent part of her daily attire, seemed to enhance her ability to understand different perspectives and mediate between conflicting needs. The chronicle is nearly complete for this phase, she announced as the meeting concluded. Anna and I have documented our traditions, our healing methods, and the stories that explain how our community came to be. When other villages begin their own awakenings, they'll have a guide to help them through the process. Radu appeared beside her as the crowd began to disperse, his presence still causing the unity ring to pulse with gentle warmth. 3 more settlements have sent messages asking for assistance with their own magical emergencies. Are you prepared for Valcea to become a center of learning for the entire region? Magda considered the question while watching Anka giggle as she made flower petals dance in the air above her hands. A year ago, I thought my purpose was to heal individuals quietly and alone. Now I understand that individual healing was just preparation for community healing. If we can help other villages find their way to this kind of harmony, then we will. Anna finished, joining their conversation with characteristic directness. It's what the bloodline was always meant to do. Grandmother would be proud to see how far we've come. That evening, as Magda walked through streets lit by lanterns that burned with magical flame, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a lonely midwife convinced of her own invisibility to the acknowledged heart of a thriving magical community, the transformation still amazed her sometimes. But perhaps the most remarkable change was the simplest one. For the first time in her adult life, she fell asleep each night certain that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, with exactly the right person beside her. The new chronicle recorded it all, preserving their story for generations yet to come.